I'm happy to introduce Reynold Bean, a marriage, family, and child counselor, an educator. He's been an author of several books on self-esteem and child development. He's worked with kids and families for many, many years. He has been a director of group homes for delinquent teenagers. He has been a consultant to diagnostic centers, schools, and social agencies. He has 5 children of his own, and he has 2 grandchildren. Reynold?
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Well, most of you are parents, which is good, because then I'll be talking about issues that you're really familiar with and aware of. Most of what I've learned about kids, like you, I've learned from my own kids. They've been my guinea pigs for many years. They don't like to hear that, and hopefully they won't watch this tape. But let me tell you a little bit about what issues became of concern to me and why I got interested in the issue of self-esteem from the start. A number of years ago, myself and some associates working in the schools, and one of the things we were trying to do is identify what we could tell about kids when they were very young in school, in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, that was most likely to tell us whether there were going to be problems later on in school, and then to identify what we could do to head that off. Well, after spending a good deal of time watching kids, in fact watching hundreds and hundreds of kids in classrooms, we finally lit upon the notion of self-esteem as being a kind of critical issue. Now, this was a number of years ago, and the issue of self-esteem had not been researched very well at that time. So what we basically were doing was trying to understand at that point what self-esteem is, because there weren't very many good definitions, and it was something akin to intelligence. In other words, everybody thought if you had more of it, it was good, and if you didn't have enough of it, you were in trouble. And then how to get from not having enough to having more of it was a bit of a mystery, but every once in a while people seemed to stumble on it. In other words, let's do something to this kid, and if something good happens, we probably did something right. And if nothing happens, it's probably the kid's fault, because that means the kid's either sick, bad, stupid, or crazy, or something like that, you know. After all, isn't that the case? If we do something to a kid that's supposed to change a kid in the good direction and nothing happens, who takes the blame for that? Okay. But the point of it is, we didn't really know what self-esteem was. We knew that there were a lot of things you could do about self-esteem that seemed to make a lot of difference for a lot of kids. Let's take an example. One would be praise, as an example. Everybody knows that it's really good to praise kids, right? Because when you praise kids, it really raises their self-esteem. But there's a group of kids, and every teacher knows about it, and all of us who've been parents for a long time know about it, that when you praise some kids, they either deny what you're praising them for, they resist the praise, they reject it in some way, or they do something very quickly after being praised to elicit criticism and punishment. Now that has really confused people for a long time, because after all, any normal kid would respond well to praise, right? So there must be something the matter with a kid who doesn't respond well to praise, because praise is correct. Well, that problem bothered me. There are some other problems that bothered me too about kids and self-esteem. One being that, of course, if we love kids enough, they'll prosper under that, correct? Love them enough, hug them, kiss them, do all that good sort of stuff. And yet we also know that there are some kids who pull away when you try and touch them, some kids who resist affection, some kids who do things to turn people off who are trying to give them a lot of love and affection. And teachers, social workers, counselors, they know how hard it is, especially for kids who are damaged in some degree, how hard it is to communicate and get kids to trust the love they have for them. So loving kids in and of itself, it's turned out, wasn't enough to simply raise a kid's self-esteem or make him better. Another thing that's supposed to help kids or be good for kids is if they're successful. Right? Anybody who's successful, their self-esteem is going to go up and so forth and so on. So one of the big things to do in schools and other places is to create success experiences for kids. Seems simple. We create a success experience, something that the kid can't blow. You know, I mean, it's going to be impossible for the kid to ruin this, right? And we know, all teachers know, all parents know, that there's a group of kids, not a small, teeny-weeny little minority either, but a lot of kids who will undermine and confound our greatest success experiences, and will find a way to fail, screw up, and elicit criticism or penalties for what they're doing. Well, all of these realities, these things that really happen to a lot of kids, these are the things that happen between kids and adults. They gave us a lot of pause about the issue of self-esteem, because it made us wonder, well, is there another level that we ought to be going to about this issue of self-esteem to find out why some kids act that way while other kids don't? One of the things that most teachers, parents, counselors know, that the easiest kids to help with self-esteem problems are kids who already have pretty good self-esteem. You know? If they have pretty good self-esteem already, then it's not really hard to keep it that way. Now, we also know that all kids run through bad times. All human beings do. You know, everybody has hard times. And so when we have hard times, of course, we suffer to some degree. We feel bad, right? One of the key ingredients about people with high self-esteem is, though, including short people, that when people with high self-esteem feel badly or life knocks them down, they get up very quickly. One of the things we know about people with low self-esteem is that they don't recover from tragedy very quickly or difficult times. Secondly, one of the things we've noticed about people with low self-esteem is when, because of circumstances beyond their control, that they feel good for a while, they never feel good for very long. So one of the really simple indices we found out of self-esteem, kind of simple-minded index, is the question is, how do you tell whether somebody's got high self-esteem or low self-esteem, right? Well, it turned out to be kind of simple. If you look at somebody for a while and it turns out that they feel good a lot and show it, chances are they have high self-esteem. And then if you find them experiencing difficulties, feeling badly for a while, but bouncing back very quickly, it's even further evidence they have high self-esteem. If a child feels badly a lot, and when circumstances are such that the child feels good for a while and then feels badly very quickly again, it's a pretty good sign the child has low self-esteem. Now, this may sound kind of simple-minded, but there's no really good way to give a test. You ask a kid, "Child, will you come and take this self-esteem test so I know where your self-esteem is," and so on. Because we also know and see it all around us, and maybe some of your children have been in this situation, that just being successful, just being very good at school, just having a lot of friends, the kind of indices of success that we adults like to believe are true, is not enough to show that a kid has low self-esteem or high self-esteem. How many times have we read, since we're all adults here, in the newspaper about a kid who's committed suicide and so on, and the kid has a list of achievements a yard long. Those achievements in and of themselves are not enough to be an index of high self-esteem. Yes, there is a correlation between, say, success in school or success in social relationships and high self-esteem, but that correlation is not absolute. And so oftentimes parents believing that if only they can get the kid to do better in school or get the kid to have more friends, automatically the self-esteem will go up. That is not truly the case. So there we were faced with this kind of notion of trying to understand what self-esteem was about. And so we decided, of course, quite simply, that if you feel good a lot of the time, and when you feel bad, get to feeling good again real fast, it's a sign of high self-esteem. Well, we weren't home free. You know why? Simple problem. What does it mean to feel good? How do you know when somebody feels good? How do you know when you feel good? What does feeling good mean? Now, it sounds like that's a crazy question to ask, because everybody knows what feeling good is about, right? Well, not so, especially for us quasi-scientific types. We like to understand things. Because the problem of feeling good is a significant problem in this sense, that if raising a child's self-esteem means moving them from not feeling good to feeling good, then the problem we have is, how do we do that? Because we know as parents, teachers, counselors, whatever we are, it's not easy. It's not easy to make a kid who has a chronic state of not feeling good into a chronic state of feeling good. And there's something that's missing, something missing in our understanding, something missing in our techniques that permit us to know how to do that. So then, as researchers, we're faced with the next problem. What does it mean to feel good, and how do we tell when someone's feeling good? So what we were basically looking at in terms of the issue of self-esteem is analyzing good feelings. What does it mean when someone has them? How do you get them? How do you lose them? And what do you do about it? Because we figured, and still figure, that if we know how to make people feel good and keep them feeling good, then we're going to make some substantial difference in their self-esteem. So then we got into the problem now of having to decide what does it mean to feel good and what is a good feeling. And that's where our model, or the issue of self-esteem, becomes quite particular. Because what we identified over time was the fact that when we say, somebody comes up and asks us, an example, somebody comes up, how you feeling? And we say, God, I feel great, you know? That's the issue. What does that mean? What is that feeling you're feeling right at that point when you go, God, I feel great? And we took a look at that. We identified, strange as it may sound, we identified 4 feelings. When people say, God, I feel wonderful, or show or express something in their behavior or demeanor that they're feeling really great, basically they mean one of 4 things. And that's what self-esteem is about. Self-esteem is about feeling good in these variety of ways. People with high self-esteem feel these particular 4 feelings that I'll be talking about a lot. And people with low self-esteem tend to feel at least one of them hardly at all or very little. And these feelings, I visualize them or imagine them kind of like a thermometer inside one's feelings, you know? And how high is the temperature, you know? If the temperature's real low, you don't have a lot of that feeling. And a lot of children's behavior is designed to get that feeling. Let me give you an example of what I mean. A very good feeling we have, imagine this. Saturday night, you're going to a party. And you're late for the party. But at the party are all of the best friends you've had for almost your whole life. The best, most dearest, closest people you have. So you come to the party as the last one. And you walk into the room. And everybody stops what they're doing. Oh, look who's here. Oh, come on. And come on, hug you, kiss you, you know, and so forth and so on. Well, what do you feel when that happens? You feel wonderful, right? You just feel wonderful. You start seeing pictures in your head, right? Like movies of times you've been with these people, you know. You start remembering things you needed to say to somebody. You start going through a whole bunch of stuff about all these people who are touching you and so forth and so on. And you have a really good feeling. Now imagine in that state if somebody came up to you and said, how you feeling? You'd say, wonderful. And what if they then said, why? What's making you feel wonderful? And you'd say, well, all my friends are here, you know, and everybody's here. Why does that make you feel wonderful? What is it about this that makes you feel wonderful? Well, what would you be doing around that point? The chances are, at that point, you'd start saying, I got to get away from this person who is asking me all these questions, right? What is it that we mostly do when we feel good? Without playing 20 questions, mostly what we do is we don't think about it. We think about it a lot when we feel badly, though, don't we? I mean, think of the last time you didn't feel good, and you're just constantly distracted by it, right? Who did it to me? What did he or she do? How am I going to get him back, you know? How am I going to stop this from happening? What did I do wrong, depending on your level of guilt, you know? And all that sort of stuff, and you're just constantly thinking about feeling badly, if you're conscious of the fact that you feel badly. But when we feel good, we never think about it. Hardly ever. It's one of the reasons we don't know very much about feeling good. We know a lot about feeling bad. You can go to the library and find tons of books about feeling bad. Every neurosis and psychosis and every other thing, you know, but there's aren't a heck of a lot of books about feeling good. There's a lot of books about how to get to feel good. You know, all the kind of pop stuff about how you get to feel good. You exercise a lot, or you eat right, or you do all sorts of things that are supposed to get you to feel good. Still, the problem is, what does it mean when we feel good? And how do we get there when we need to? And how do we stay there? That feeling that I just described at this party, that's what we call having a sense of connectedness. Because that feeling we have is a feeling like being part of people, right? Being part of something, having something be part of us. Having belonging. You know, maybe it's the feeling that some of you may have experienced, as an example, if you watch the 1984 Olympics. You know, most of us don't think a whole lot about, as an example, like being an American. It's not anything we kind of go around with all day long, carrying a little flag, waving it and crying, you know, waving it and crying. But I know for myself, when I watched the 1984 Olympics, there was a kind of connection to being an American that became very important to me. And I noticed a lot of my friends, the weirdest people, were feeling like Americans all of a sudden, crying with those kids who were winning the flag, coming, you know, and so forth and so on, and doing all that, and feeling that kind of connection. What we feel connected to determines our level of the sense of connectedness. Some people feel connected to all of life. Some people feel connected to only a small part of life. Children have this sense of connectedness. They either have a lot of it or a little of it, or anything in between. I'll get back to talking about connectedness because I want to lay out the other 4 feelings. Then we'll talk about them all at one time. So one good feeling is this feeling, what we call the sense of connectedness, that comes as a result of feeling connected to us, to something. Something belongs to us. We belong to something. Now imagine your kids. Imagine this one. You're looking out the window at your child, and your child doesn't know you're watching, right? And all of a sudden you see your kid do something especially noble or virtuous, you know. Give a toy to a friend. Say, after you, you know. Oh, you go first. Something the kid hardly ever does when he knows you're watching. But, you know, out of the window you kind of catch that. And what's the feeling you have? I know the feeling that I have. Mine. My kid, right? That's my kid. The real strong feeling of ownership, isn't that right? Because what do we do when the kid acts bad? Will you take care of your child, please? Don't we do that? Husbands say it to wives, wives to husbands. So when we love someone, that feeling of ownership, you belong to me, you're mine. Right? Now, when we start getting real cognitive about it, oh, that's silly. Nobody owns everybody else. But the kind of basic feeling is that we belong. Kids feel that their parents own them. That's one of the reasons they get so devastated when a parent dies or parents get divorced. Because they have made this assumption that they are, quote, owned by the parent. Now, how can one of these parents go away? I mean, it's like giving up your car. Your father would never give up his car, right? He'd never say, oh, the hell with it, I'll just leave my car, you know, and wander off. But heck, he left the whole family and just wandered off. Now, that makes no sense to kids, and it's devastating. Because what it means is that that sense of ownership is broken. That sense of ownership has to do with trust, right? You bought a new car. You love your new car, right? Sit in your new car when nobody's watching, you know, you rub the seats, smell it, touch all the dials, right? Just like you're making love to a car, right? So, because that sense of ownership, that sense of belonging, that sense of it's mine, is akin to the same feeling of love. So we can have this feeling towards material objects. We can have it towards people. We can have it towards places. Aren't there places you love? Places you feel comfortable, places you feel safe, places you feel secure. This feeling comes about in a lot of different ways. Now, when we're watching it in kids, the manifestation of this feeling is very interesting. Because now if a kid kind of comes up to you and kind of rubs up against, you know, like a cat rubbing on your leg, but kids do that too, that's a sign of the seeking of connection, right? It's a sign of like they want more of this feeling, right? Kid curls up in your lap. A larger child comes up and throws his or her arm around you and say, "How you doing, Mom? How you doing, Dad?" You know? Any way that this feeling is engendered is something that kids need. Kids who have a high sense of connectedness, because it's carried around in us like a thing. You know, we got it, or we got it in certain quantities. Kids who have a high sense of connectedness, usually very friendly, very outgoing, very trusting. Then when they talk to you, they look straight at you. They smile, you know? They feel good a lot. They lean into you when you touch them instead of leaning away from you. They are very forthright. You can tell it in their eyes. You know, they're right there with you all the time. Kids with a low sense of connectedness are not like that. Kids with a low sense of connectedness are frequently shy. They oftentimes pull away. They are not very trusting. They don't communicate very well. You ask them a question, "How are you?" "Fine." "What are you doing?" "Nothing." "What are you going to do next?" "I don't know." It's real hard also to feel close to a kid who has a low sense of connectedness. A lot of parents feel real guilty about it. And the reason for that is that in a relationship, we expect all relationships to be two ways. I give you something and get something back from you. Now, people with a low sense of connectedness tend to cut that off. They absorb because their need is great to feel connected, but they don't give back because they can't be sure how their giving back is going to be reciprocated. You see, because kids with a low sense of connectedness really don't read people very well. And so they don't know what to do. That's what a shy kid. Now, we take a kid who's shy. It's not the shyness isn't a result that the child doesn't like people or the child doesn't need people. Quite the contrary. Shy children need people very, very much. The problem that the shy child has is the shy child can't predict with great accuracy how people are going to respond to his or her overtures. And they can't take the risk of doing something and eliciting some kind of criticism or punishment, or not getting the response that they expect. So a shy child holds back. And thus, when somebody reaches out to a shy child and say, "Hi, how are you?" You know, and the kid kind of withdraws, the withdrawal, again, is not a result of the child not liking people, but the child not being sure what response is going to be correct. So shy children and shy adults don't interact with people. Low sense of connectedness keeps them in this kind of constant treadmill of not being sure about how people are going to respond to them, not being able to size up people quickly, not be able to tell how people are feeling, and thus their whole relationship thing is thrown off. Because when you have a high sense of connectedness or an adequate sense of connectedness, the sense of what people are going to do to you, for you, with you, or about you is kind of automatic. You go up to somebody and say, "Hello, how are you?" You, just like happened, fully expect a bright smile. "Fine, how are you?" You know? Shy people can't make that judgment that well. And especially shy children who have limited experience in life may very well be totally undone by somebody trying to unshy them. I call it de-shying a kid. You know, if only we, you know, go at the kid enough, you know, give the kid a lot of love, you know, "Come on, kid, let's play," you know, do that enough, the kid will be de-shied. Well, it turns out that increases the anxiety in a shy child and usually drives them further into shyness. So this sense of connectedness is like a quality in a child. And it explains certain kinds of behavior. In school, you can tell who the low connectedness kids are. They are kids oftentimes who wear a lot more clothes than are required by the temperature. They wear hats, they wear their sweaters or jackets. They carry a lot of junk around in their pockets. And the reason for that is that they feel more comfortable when something personal is close to them. Shy children, low connectedness children touch themselves a lot. You sometimes think that a low connectedness kid isn't washed enough because they're always kind of itching, scratching, pulling their ear, biting their fingernails, putting their fingers in the house, curling their hair. And if you watch them, say, in a classroom, you'll see this kind of behavior grow with respect to the amount of anxiety that the child has. Low connectedness kids usually function very well in one-to-one relationships in a classroom. And as the relationship ends, their anxiety begins to grow and their work diminishes. That's why so many teachers say, well, when I work with your child one-to-one, he really demonstrates that he understands, he can do the work and so forth. I don't know why he can't do it on his own. Well, there really is only one answer why he can't do it on his own, because he gets very anxious. Low connectedness children in school are considered to be easily distracted. They have short attention spans. What they're doing all the time, though, is watching other people. That's what they're doing. That's where their attention goes. They look at a paper and quickly look up to see what's going on around them. They connect with their eyes and with their feelings. Watch poignant looks come over their face as they see two other children interacting closely or intimately with each other. The sense of connectedness, when a child has a low sense of connectedness, the child is very disabled. Because human relationships are the kind of fundamental matrix of life. We have to learn how to monitor, control, evaluate, analyze, promote, all sorts of things in human relationship. We can't get through life very effectively without doing that. And when a child has a low sense of connectedness, that child is handicapped because all of that is a great problem for the child. He doesn't analyze people well, doesn't know how to promote relationships that are consistently satisfying, doesn't sense other people's feelings in a way that allows him to give back to the other person something they need, so other people frequently get put off by low connectedness kids. If a parent has a high connectedness child and a low connectedness child, and they could be in the same family, the parent, quote, loves the high connectedness child more than the low connectedness child, and the parent feels terribly guilty about it. And what do we do when we as parents feel guilty? We, of course, try and do something to assuage our guilt, right? So then what we do is we go to the child we, quote, don't love as much and try to do more for that kid, right? I've always done it. Hell, I got 5 of them. I know, you know. I've had it. You think you may have problems? I have every problem you guys ever have had. Anyway, so we do that. What do we communicate to a child when the child senses our tension or our anxiety or our guilt, that we're doing something for the child that isn't emanating from a simple feeling of desire, but is coming from some other place in us, the place that says, I ought to do this because I feel bad because I'm not doing it. What happens is the child automatically senses it. We know that. We don't even have to be real scientific about it. We can see it in the child's face. We tell it in the child's behavior. And thus what happens is the low connectedness child begins to feel that there's something wrong with him or her. Because after all, why would my mother or father be doing this to me if there wasn't something the matter with me? And that's when the bad self-image starts. And that leads into the next feeling I want to talk about. The next feeling I want to talk about is something we call the sense of uniqueness. Now, just as it feels very good to be connected to things, to be part of something, to have things belong to us and so forth, it also feels very good to be singular, distinct, unique, and special. One of a kind, right? Isn't it interesting? You can walk in, especially in the United States, you can walk into an auditorium, and I have. And in that auditorium are 1,000 people, and no 2 of them are dressed alike, right? Actually, at the higher levels of fashion, it is quite awful to go to some place and be dressed like anybody else, right? What is it that we use to express who we are? A lot we use clothes, right? This is me. Yeah, I'm kind of your blue guy, right? Kind of your blue, that's me. You know, you get people who are brown people, you know, you get people who are red people. You get people dressed to express who they think they are, who they'd like to believe they are, or who they really are. Because it comes out of a feeling. We see something, ooh, that's me. I'm going to put it on. We feel wonderful. Let's say you're artistic, and you've done something artistic, and then you do your ta-da with it. See? And everybody goes, woo, that's wonderful. How fantastic. What's the feeling you get? The feeling you get is, wonderful, I feel great, right? You like to cook. So you spend time cooking a very fantastic meal. You put it out on the table. People go to eat it. They say, this is fantastic. I've never tasted anything like this. It is so unique that I have never tasted anything like this in all the years I've lived on the face of the earth. That's how special you are. You've made it so good. Wonderful feeling. Anytime we express ourselves, who we are, and we receive approval for that, that feeling we get at that point is what we call the sense of uniqueness. The sense that I'm special, the sense that I'm different, the sense that I'm one of a kind. Okay. So that's what happens to us. It's a very good feeling. All of us would like to have more of it. Oftentimes we feel maybe we're two or three of a kind, But one of a kind is really hard to come by a lot, that we're so unique. But in fact, it is true we're unique. Nature spawns infinite variety. At the biological level, there are no two things on the face of the planet that are alike. Take a field of flowers, as any biologist knows. Take a field of flowers, and if you looked at every one of them closely, you'd find they're all individualistic flowers. They can't move around a whole lot, but they do their flower thing as best they can, but everyone does it a little differently. No two flowers are the same. No two organisms are the same. No two anything on the face of the earth is the same. And no two human beings are the same. So our individuality is not a kind of psychological quirk. It's actually built into our biological natures to be different one from another. The thing we do as human beings, though, is we have a problem in dealing with feelings about that issue. You see, we feel about it. Do I feel like I'm special? Well, I can feel like I'm special two ways, right? I can feel like I'm specially good, and I can feel like I'm specially bad. I can feel that things that make me unique are wonderful characteristics which everyone loves, and I could feel that the things that make me unique are terrible characteristics that everyone hates. And the things that I think are most important about me and which vector I put on them, a positive or a negative, are going to make me determine what my self-concept is. Do I have a positive self-concept or a negative self-concept? And it all has to do with things that I think are important. You see, an example for me that I'll use as an example is when I was a kid in school, I was a behavior problem. No one would believe that about me now, of course. And I used to get punished. And what did I get punished a lot for was talking out of turn, right? Talked a lot. Always talking. Talking when the teacher didn't want me to talk. Talking when the teacher was talking. I was always doing that, go to the principal's office, stay after school, the whole ball of wax. Well, isn't it interesting, though, that I used to get punished for talking, now I get paid for it. Now, I think that's pretty smart. Pretty smart if you can do it. Fortunately, somehow, my talking a lot and getting punished for it as a kid didn't ruin the instinct in me, And now I can get a lot of positive reward. So I think that makes me really special, that I talk well in front of groups. Maybe I don't talk good like English, all the proper grammar, but I talk well. I mean, people do invite me back from time to time. Anyway, that makes me special. Now, if people come up to me and say, Mr. Bean, we really want to give you a little feedback about your talk. We thought your talk was awful. Everyone was bored by it. People demanded their money back, the whole thing. I'd be devastated, right? Because it's so central to my self-image to believe that I talk well. Now, if somebody came up to me and said, Mr. Bean, we've been observing you, and we want you to know that we think that you would make a terrible skydiver. Just awful. You don't have the body for it. You don't seem to have the instinct for it. You don't just seem to have anything about being a skydiver. And stay away from airplanes and parachutes. Just don't do it. How would that affect me? Not at all. Don't have a bone in my body that has any wish to be a skydiver. Nothing. So the fact that I was criticized or put down for the absence of that quality or those characteristics makes no difference to me. All of us have a catalog of things about ourselves that we think are important. Kids do too. Early on, they already are developing those things about themselves that are very important. An example is, I've known and have observed and worked with teachers in classrooms and kids who are extremely bright. IQs, 160, 170, 180, for whatever good IQ is. You start praising a kid like that for being smart, you know what happens? Nothing. Kid couldn't care less. I remember a kid whose tested IQ was 180, who has a behavior problem in school. He would hear what would go in from his teacher would go in his ear and come out his hand and his pencil. Done. He had it. You know, that's how fast he learned. Whoop! He had it. He would do things on weekends like write papers that were quality of seniors in high school, because it was raining and he didn't have anything to do on the weekend. So he just studied some subject he had never done before, he was in 3rd grade, by the way, brought the paper into school. What could the teacher say? It was better than anything she could have done, you know? And so all the praise and approval this kid got for brilliance had no meaning to him at all, since both his parents had PhDs and he had a sister who was a genius. I mean, in that family, being smart was no big thing, right? The thing that made him a problem was he wanted to be just one of the kids, one of the guys. It was really interesting watching this brilliant, intellectual kid. He'd wear his baseball mitt on his belt all the time in class, you know. He'd never take his hat off. It's always his baseball hat. He was always punching kids in the arm, like, you know, like guys do, you know. On the football field, they pat each other on the butt. I don't know why they do that. No good psychologist has ever explained that to me. But nevertheless, punching in the arm, patting on the back, you know. He constantly do that, and other kids would be driven to distraction by it. And it was pretty clear that what he was trying to do was be their buddy. He didn't know how to be their buddy. Most kids were highly intimidated by him, you know, because he was so brilliant. So he had that kind of problem. Being smart wasn't central to his self-concept. It was just like breathing. Never thought about it. But being one of the guys, that issue was central to his self-concept. He felt terrible about it because he couldn't be one of the guys. He wasn't accepted at one of the guys. He didn't know how to be one of the guys. And so his behavior was all surrounding that issue of feeling badly about himself because he wasn't just one of the guys. Kids who have uniqueness problems are kids who are called in school behavior problems. Now, a behavior problem kid is not simply a kid who acts bad, because every kid acts badly sometimes. But behavior problem kids are kids who act badly despite knowing that they're going to be punished or criticized for it. Now that gets to sounding like crazy. After all, aren't ordinary, normal human beings only supposed to do things that elicit praise and reward, and avoid doing things that consistently elicit punishment and pain, right? We learned that in first-year psych. But it turns out that kids who have a low sense of uniqueness don't operate that way. What happens is they do the things that elicit the pain or the criticism or the punishment over and over and over again, despite knowing that that's going to occur over and over and over again. And why do they do that? This seems to be the big dilemma, big enigma. Well, it's really simple when looked at from this perspective of having low uniqueness. They do that over and over again because they think doing that is being themselves. And since one of our greatest motives is to be ourselves, if I am the kind of guy who's supposed to be in trouble, I mean, that's my singular claim to fame. I am noticed when I'm in trouble. I am noticed when the teacher gets angry at me. I am very good at getting teachers upset with me. Then in order to be myself, I have to do that, right? I have to do it over and over again. And guess what the evidence is that I've done it well? The evidence is that I got punished, criticized, or blamed. I know I've done it. I mean, teachers go crazy with kids who are like this. Because what happens is they chew the kid out. The kid, usually low uniqueness kids are not stupid, so they're kind of bright. They sit there, they know they're supposed to be remorseful. Kids with uniqueness problems are usually very good role players because they're kind of doing themselves all the time, or at least trying to. And so what they do is they're remorseful. They hang their head. But as the teacher says something like, now go away and don't do it again and don't bother me and blah, 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 they kind of smile as they turn away. And it drives teachers out of their skull. And the reason they smile is this. People don't smile unless they're feeling good. Guaranteed. People don't smile unless they're feeling good. What happens when a kid with a low sense of uniqueness gets criticized, punished, or blamed for something? That confirms the child's self-concept self-concept and self-image. And when our self-concept is confirmed, it makes us feel good. Whether that is a positive self-concept or a negative one. It works absolutely the same way. And it's why kids who are behavior problems are so enigmatic. They're supposed to act differently, and it turns out that they act just like the rest of us who feel good about ourselves. They act the same way, except that they feel bad about themselves. And they consistently do these things over and over again to gain confirmation from the environment that, in fact, they are who they believe they are. Now, an example, I'll use my example because I was a behavior problem. I got a lot of good examples. Actually, I've rarely run into a kid who was as bad as I was. But back in those days, people tended to accept that more. I mean, after all, there were some kids who were just, if you'll pardon the expression, lousy kids, and that was it. Now, you can't just be a lousy kid. You have to go to the shrink. There's something the matter with you. You got psychological disturbance. You know, I was just a bad kid, and everybody accepted that, figured I'd come to no good in the end. Fooled them, all right. Anyway, what happened is I had a teacher who used to keep book on us. She was very strange. If she's in teacher heaven now, I apologize for everything I ever did to her, because I became a teacher and it was all done to me. Anyway, she used to keep book. If you did something wrong, she'd say, Bean, 15 points for that. She'd mark it down in her book. 15 points meant 15 minutes after school. And she'd add it up, and you do it accumulatively, you know, big gobs of it. If she was staying after school, you'd say 60 points, you'd use up 90 points. If she was staying a long time, you might stay 2 hours after school, you know, use up 120 points, and then she'd deduct it, and it was all arithmetic kind of thing that she kept. Well, periodically, she would announce the number of points that people have. This was her motivational strategy. And she would start from the top of the list. And there was always, this was I think in 5th or 6th grade, and there was always girls at the top of the list. Again, it was that long ago. Because they were always well behaved, you see, and the boys were at the bottom of the list because boys weren't well behaved, and that was everybody's expectation. So she'd always start with, I always have called her over the years Miss Priss, whoever she was, just the best behaved girl in class who always had no points. Now, she was always, no points. She was very pleased with herself, very proud, and, you know, took the plaudits of the group for being the best behaved person in class. Teacher would read down through the list, and her voice would get lower and lower and lower, more severe. You know how we as parents and teachers do that. More severe, and she'd get to the bottom of the list. Bean. As guttural as she could make it. 275 points. Now, the interesting thing is my reaction was absolutely the same as Miss Priss's. Ta-da! And everybody would clap. You see, I was bad, but I wasn't stupid. I knew there were only 2 places on that whole list that were really special. The top of the list and the bottom. Not a prayer that I was ever going to make it to the top of the list. Not a prayer. So the only other place I could ever be was at the bottom of the list. And if I wasn't, on the day she announced the points, by the end of that day I was. Now I look back at that now and say, it was all unconscious at the time. But what I was continually trying to do was reinforce my own sense of specialness. And my sense of specialness in that context was that I had the biggest mouth, which I now get paid for. I was able to pull more tricks. I was able to get more kids to do what I want than the teacher could. I was able to gain more attention in class at the wrong time than anyone, and that really made me special. And so she gave me an absolute measure of how bad I was by giving those points. The poor lady never figured it out. Probably it was the worst year of her entire teaching career, the year she had me. She never figured out that what she was doing daily by giving me those points was reinforcing my behavior to no end, and I constantly was the worst kid in class, except when I spent time in the principal's office, which I found to be very interesting, by the way. The principal's office is much more interesting than class, which ultimately is why I became a school principal, I'm sure, because that was really the place to be. The classroom wasn't that interesting. Anyway, the sense of uniqueness, this kid in a class, the kid that you have in your families, who believes that something about him or her is not good. They have to continue to act that out until that changes. Let me go on to the third feeling that is an important ingredient of self-esteem. That's what we call the sense of power. The feeling that I can accomplish what I set out to do consciously. Now, we're always setting out to do things unconsciously, right? turn, pick up your fork, say hello, respond, thank you very much. Fortunately, most of our life is lived unconsciously. Imagine if we had to think about everything we were doing. We'd never get out of bed in the morning, especially if we had to assess the dangers that were out there. I mean, for some, we may not have even gotten into bed at night, But anyway, the point of it is, we live our life a lot unconsciously. But there are certain points in our life that we don't live unconsciously, where we make conscious decisions, issues of conscious intent. We decide to put this sweater on rather than the other sweater. We decide to go to work. We decide to go to school. We decide what to have for breakfast. We decide all sorts of things. We decide where to go to college. We decide which job to take. We decide where we're going to live. We're deciding who we will fall in love with. We will decide who we'll reject. We'll decide all sorts of things. And when we do those things consciously, and when we actually carry out our intent successfully, that's when we start feeling good, isn't it? Simple. Feel good. I think I will have the Chateaubriand on the menu. Conscious decision. It comes. Wonderful. Made a good choice. I will brag about that choice endlessly, right? How wonderful that choice was. I make a decision to put on a certain suit or a certain tie. Somebody says, "Oh, that's a very nice suit or a very nice tie." Ha! Successful. I decide to fix the flat tire on my car. I fix it right off. Feel very good about myself. I decide to take the top off the pickle jar that my wife has handed to me. Every man in this room, every man above the age of 13, has been handed a pickle jar, oftentimes by a woman, who says, "Can you get the top off of this, dear?" Now, this is where I discovered the sense of power. In the pickle jar. Man takes the pickle jar, goes, nothing moves. What happens, guys? Something begins to go inside. Do it again. Nothing goes on, Get out a knife. Bam, 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 bam. Hit that thing, Still nothing. Bang it on the counter. Bam, 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 bam. Still nothing. Run it under the cold water. Run it under the hot water. Anything. Because now this pickle jar is a challenge. When we finally get that little, the air rushing into the pickle jar, what happens, guys? Especially if it's been a struggle. We go, "Here you are, dear." Right? That feeling, when we get that out of the pickle jar, that feeling is the sense of power. The sense that we're able to do something that we set out to do consciously. It's the same for men and women. It's the same for tall or short people. Kids who have a high sense of power presume that they will be successful at what they set out to do. They presume it. And thus, when they're faced with a challenge, their first question is, how do I deal with it? How do I get around it? How do I handle it? Because the presumption, unconscious, is that I'm going to find a way, so let me find a way. That means that kids with high sense of power take a lot of risks. It doesn't mean they take dumb risks, but they will take risks. A kid looks at a tall tree and says, "I can climb that." Now his problem is, how? And so he finds a way. He gets all the way up to the top of the tree, and he looks down and says, "Hi, Mommy!" And Mommy goes, Why? Because Mommy feels powerless to climb the tree, to get him down. Mommy feels powerless to catch him when he falls. Mommy feels powerless to do anything about the situation except say things like, "Get down here right now, but don't get down here right now, don't," and so forth and so on. The kid feels wonderful because he made a conscious intent to climb the tree and carried it out successfully. Now if he can get down, also very good. Most kids who climb trees get down. The odds are with you, Mom. Really, believe it. Anyway, kids with high power are always doing it. They go to school. If they have a high sense of power, the teacher gives them something they don't know. Their presumption is, all I have to do is devote some time and attention to this, and I'll get it. And so they stick with things. They're persistent. They are willing to make decisions because they've had a history of making decisions and having their decisions come out successfully. They They're responsible, because responsibility simply means the act of making a decision that other people deem to be appropriate, right? And so if you're responsible, that means you make decisions that are appropriate, you get praise for it, reward, and so forth and so on. So kids with a high sense of power are responsible. Now, kids with low power, the fundamental difference between a kid with a low sense of power and a kid with a high sense of power is that the kid with a low sense of power does not presume automatically and unconsciously that he or she is going to be successful at what they do. Actually, the lower the sense of power, the more the unconscious presumption is, I'll fail. I'll blow it. I won't get it right. Something. So what happens then is that the child with a low sense of power, when faced with a challenge, and this presumption that I'm going to blow it, will find a way to avoid the challenge. So they will not make decisions, they will not take responsibility. As soon as they come to an obstacle, they give up very quickly. In fact, by the time they get to be in 2nd to 3rd grade, they have discovered the golden path to avoiding failure. And that is, don't try in the first place. Because if you don't try, you can't be held accountable, right? Nobody can say you blew it if you never tried. And by 2nd to 3rd grade, kids with a low sense of power already have that thing. So what do? They find ways to get people to be their agents. Do it for me. And so kids with low power are always asking their parents, their teachers, their friends to do things for them that they're absolutely capable of doing themselves. But they will not do them because still, even if it could be proven to them on a stack of Bibles that big, you're going to make it, kid, the thing that gets in the way is that unconscious presumption. Somehow, I'm going to find a way to blow it. I'm not even going to have to find a way to blow it. See, kids with a high sense of power are not fatalists. They tend to feel that their life, the control of their life is in their own hands. Kids with a low sense of power are fatalists. They feel their life is not in their hands. Things are always happening to them, coming out of the blue. Things they could not predict, they could not anticipate. So the world for them tends to be a rather scary place because they don't know how it is they're going to fail, but they're pretty sure they're going to fail. So what happens? When you're a fatalist, what is the result of tragedy? Who do you blame tragedy on? Yourself? No. You blame it on the world. So kids who have a low sense of power are blamers. If something goes wrong, it's never their fault. They're whiners. You can hear it in their voice. Kids with low power, they whine a lot. They cry easily. They get angry easily because one element of our sense of power is the capacity to control our own feelings, right? And kids with low sense of power don't have that capacity. Kids with a very low sense of power, when they get angry, automatically start crying. The whole thing comes unglued. Have you ever seen a kid like that? Just, they get angry and they can't control their emotions at all. Kids with a very high sense of power are not stoics, but they have more situations in which they're in control of their feelings, and thus they are capable of withstanding more pain, more difficulties. They will stick with a hike longer, even though they're very tired. They'll do whatever it is, even though it's very hard, because they're able to control their feelings to a very considerable extent. So, when a kid is in a classroom with a low sense of power, without this capacity for persistence, without this capacity for responsibility, without the capacity for taking on challenge, what's their academic result like? Well, it's meager. Because they don't do the thing on their own. They'll find agents, help me. They'll go to the teacher, to the aide, to the brightest kid in class to get help for something that they really are capable of doing themselves. And the sense of power in no way correlates with their basic capabilities. And that's what drives teachers and parents crazy, is you know the kid's smart, you know the kid's capable of doing it, but the kid doesn't choose to do it. And there seems to be no good way to get him or her to make that choice, because the choice is made by the person, not by the environment. Sometimes the environment requires us to make some choices, but the choice nevertheless is made inside. And when a kid with a low sense of power doesn't make the choice, there's no way to energize and get that kid to move or to act. So low power kids are kids who don't do very well in school because they avoid risk, they avoid challenge, they presume they're going to fail, they want to avoid the onus of failure again, so they don't try, and they never generate enough energy and enough spunk, so to speak, to move ahead through whatever it is they know or need to know. All teachers will tell you that the chief determiner of school success is not intelligence. The chief determinant of success in school is a sense of responsibility. Because kids with pedestrian intelligence and a high sense of responsibility will do fantastically well in school. And we all have seen kids with great intelligence and a very poor sense of responsibility do terribly in school, grade-wise, in terms of reputation, and so forth and so on. So, kids, the one thing that distinguishes kids with low power from kids with high power is simply this. Kids with low power are spoiled. Spoiled. Now, kids don't get spoiled by having too much. What they get spoiled by is not being held accountable. That's what spoils a child. When a child is not held accountable for something the child is capable of doing well, that's the spoiled child. The spoiled child gets people to be his or her agents. And how does a child get spoiled like that? The child gets spoiled by parents not having rules at home, not having consistent rules, not imposing rules and consequences consistently. You see, when you tell a kid this, either you feed the dog by 5 o'clock or you don't watch television tonight, right? That immediately creates a choice. Now, the fundamental issue in the sense of power is the conscious choice, right? Making a choice consciously, assessing the consequences of that choice, and doing it successfully. What we want to do to build a sense of power in children is to give them as many choices as possible. Rules and limits and consequences, even so it sounds a little funny, automatically create a decision-making situation for a child. Well, if I don't feed the dog, then I won't watch TV. Well, I know the consequence of that, now I can make a choice. We all know that kids choose to do things that elicit punishment. We all know that. All kids do it at one time or another. So it's not like there's no choice. A lot of kids make the choice, nothing I want to see on TV tonight. I don't feel like, I'd rather go out than feed the dog. Okay, Mom. Hey, Mom, I didn't feed the dog. No TV tonight. See you later. Bye. And goes in his room and reads all night, which is what he wanted to do in the first place anyway. No problem. What happens, though, is that if a kid doesn't have those kind of choices, they never learn about their own capacity for making choices and having those choices come right in the end. And unless the kid begins to have those kinds of choices early on in life, that sense that I can't make choices well will underlie everything that the kid does and dilute their sense of power. The last condition, or the issue of self-esteem, I've talked about 3 of them so far. The sense of connectedness, the sense of uniqueness, the sense of power, and the last one is something we call the sense of models. The sense of models is about making sense out of things. Now, imagine that you've had this knotty problem, and it's been weighing on your mind for a long time, you know, and all of a sudden, all of the ingredients of that problem fall into place. And you go, aha, I got it. Now, with that cognitive perception comes a feeling, right? Oh, I got it. You know, look at that. Some of you may do jigsaw puzzles. Now, you lay out all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and it all is this booming mess until you find pieces that form an edge or a corner, right? And then you go, ah! Something in you goes, ah! I got it. There it is. You found the reference point to begin to make sense out of all the rest of it. You look at the picture on the jigsaw puzzle, and the picture says, look, at all this stuff here is yellow. Let's get all the yellow pieces over here, you know? Another frame of reference. And as soon as you begin to put some of the yellow pieces together, you have the reference point for doing all the rest. When we get that reference point, when we understand the frame of reference or understand the meaning of something that's very important to us, this feeling we get associated with that is the sense of models. When you do something that you know is right according to your moral and ethical values, you get the same feeling. Anybody been given too much change at the supermarket? Okay. Get too much change at the supermarket. The checker puts $5 too much in your hand. And he quickly turns to the next customer, and you know he didn't know that he gave you $5. You got $5 too much in your hand. So you say, excuse me, sir, you gave me $5 too much. Here's your money back. Checker goes, oh, thank you, or doesn't say anything, or grunts, because some people don't like to be caught making mistakes, you know. So you give him $5, but you walk out feeling very pleased with yourself, right? I did something that was honest and right and true. Very good feeling. That's a sense of models. Conversely, $5 in your hand, you look at it, checker's looking at it. God sheds His grace in strange and unusual ways. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Fool and his money are soon parted. So, sense of models has to do with doing things that are correct according to our own lights, our own feelings, making sense out of something. Anything that is associated with what we call a model. That's why we call it the sense of models. I have a model for understanding right and wrong, good and bad, true and not true. Anytime I use that model and it's successful, or it produces some success or positive response from me, then this sense of models is activated. I have models floating around in my head, models, you know, like a person who's my model. Right? I have teachers who have become my models, my mentors, and so on. When I do something that I believe would satisfy them or exemplify some of the standards they set for me, I feel very good. All of us have those. Sometimes even they're our parents. And we're pleased by our ability to have demonstrated something in our life that would please a parent or a teacher or a counselor or a friend or somebody whom we have looked up to as a model for our own behavior. And we oftentimes measure our own behavior against that model. How am I doing? We ask ourselves. Well, the answer to that question is, how am I doing in reference to what? And oftentimes it's reference to someone that we very actively keep in our consciousness a lot, which forms the basis of our behavior. And another model we have is the model, what I call operational models. And these are just, I call them grooves in the brain. They just tell us what to do. Somebody says, hello, how are you? We say, fine, thank you, and how are you? Without thinking about it at all. Good manners, we get grooves. We got grooves for good manners. We want our kids to have good manners, we've got to groove the brain so that it comes out automatic. They don't have to think about it, right? That's what we mean by, quote, kids with good manners. Now, the issue with these, what I call operational models, is this, that the more of them we have that are useful, the easier it is to get through life. The more things I know how to do, when I go on automatic, the easier my life will be. If I'm a technician of some sort, the more I can do my technical work without having to think about it, the better a technician I am. Then if I have enough of this stuff that I don't have to think about that allows me to go to the next level with my technical expertise because I've already got this much already locked up, then I can go to higher level technical proficiency. No, in any field, it doesn't make any difference. So in effect, the more I know, the more I'm able to learn, the more I'm able to do. Right? So, should I do that one again because of the lady up there who just came over that thing? Okay, what we want, I won't forget it, we'll cut that piece of tape out. Okay, so that a child who has a high sense of models is characterized by several different qualities. One is the child's sense of right and wrong is very clear and consistent, right? They know what's right, they know what's wrong, and they're able to operate consistently with regard to that set of principles or that set of ideas. The second thing that characterizes a child with a high sense of models is that he or she has some strong images in their life that they use as reference points. A strong father, a strong mother, a strong and loved grandparent, or something like that, who they use as a reference point for judging what's right and wrong and what's good and bad to do in their own life. And the third thing that characterizes a child with a high sense of models is they have lots of operational models in their head that tell them how to do things. And those things come directly from their experience, not necessarily book learning, but you'll find that children with a high sense of models are usually broadly experienced, even if they're short. even if they're only 4 or 5 years old. They've been lots of places with their parents. They've met lots of different kinds of people. They've been in many different situations and learned how to handle themselves in a variety of situations, which means that when they get in new situations, they have all these reference points for knowing how to act successfully in a new situation. That's the child with a high sense of models. Child with a low sense of models, on the other hand, oftentimes is very confused about right or wrong. See, what characterizes a kid with a low sense of models is not that the kid's a crook. They don't steal all the time. The problem is they only steal part of the time. The biggest problem is nobody can tell when they're going to do it. You see, get a kid with a low sense of models, he walked past a $5 bill sitting on the table 100 times. Won't touch it, knowing that's daddy's, that's mommy's, it doesn't belong to me. And the 101st time this model of right and wrong breaks down, disappears, like that. Picks up the $5, put it in his pocket, checks nobody's watching, and goes off with it. If the kid is caught, the interesting thing that characterizes kids with models problems is when they're asked why they did it, they don't know. And that's the true answer. Because the real answer is the reason they did it is their model that said don't do it broke down. Just like that. It went away, it disappeared. And thus, bam, they took the $5. Kids with a low sense of models oftentimes don't have very many strong, significant human models in their life. They may come from broken families. They may come from very small families, oftentimes very small families, where there aren't a lot of same-sex persons. Let's say a young man grows up in a family where lots of women and doesn't have a whole lot of experience outside the family of men. Or it could be the vice versa for a girl. You see? And it isn't only the sexual identification, it is having people who I define as being like me. And if I have people that are like me, then I want to see how they act, to see how I should act, right? Especially if I'm little, that's all. I'm not doing there's not a sexual, biological issue here. It's only that I need people like me to identify with that help me guide my behavior and make choices about what I'm doing. And the last thing that characterizes a child with low sense of models, they don't have a whole lot of operational models. They're limited. It makes it very hard for them to learn. And so they may not be stupid, but they still have difficulty learning, which sounds paradoxical. Because what they need, in order to learn, you need to know a lot, right? Because learning means putting old stuff together in new ways with a little bit of new data. Too much new data, not enough old stuff. Huh? What does that all mean? Right? So most of learning is a lot of old stuff with a little bit of new data, and we find a way to integrate that new piece into the old stuff. Now, if we don't have enough, quote, old stuff up there, have a hell of a time learning. And that characterizes kids with low models. And what you see behaviorally in these kids is this. One, that they are oftentimes very confused about what to do. They're head bobbers. They're always looking around like, where's it at? You see this physical referent in them. Where is it at? Where is it at? What am I supposed to do next? Now, that means that when they're given directives, they have a very difficult time carrying out directives, especially complex ones, which are like, Joey, will you go over there and get me that dish and that napkin off of that table and bring me the salt and pepper from this table and bring it all over here. A kid with a high sense of models may be able to retain that all in mind simultaneously. A kid with a low sense of models just gets totally blown away by it. Pretty soon figures they don't know what they're doing. They can't follow physical directions. You tell them to go someplace and they can't figure out how to get there because they don't have a mental map, a model in their head about how to do that. They have very great difficulty solving complex problems, complex physical problems and so on, because all problem solving involves a model that you go into that problem solving situation with, and a lot of times kids with low models don't have it in their head to know how to solve problems. So they get very confused, they have a difficult time learning. Observationally, behaviorally, you'll see them tend to be very disheveled. They wear different colored socks, and when you point it out to them, they'll get very embarrassed that they got that wrong. They learn by rote. You have to tell them something over and over and over and over again before they get it. They profit from just kind of ordinary learning, doing 1 or 2 problems at a time and then getting them checked and so forth and so on. And they need real clear models to make a difference in their life. Well, anyway, these are the 4 issues, the 4 feelings that have to do with self-esteem. The sense of connectedness, the sense of uniqueness, the sense of power, and the sense of models. What we've discovered is that low self-esteem means that a child may have a deficit in one of these feelings. And if that is in fact the case, a lot of the child's behavior, as I've tried to demonstrate, is centered around that issue. They're trying to get themselves to feel that because feeling any one of those things feels very good, right? The absence of the feeling becomes very, very uncomfortable. And what the child tries to do is reclaim that sense of comfort by somehow getting that feeling. That's why kids with low connectedness will pester you all the time until you relate to them. They will then accept that relationship as being what they need. At least it's more of what they need and less of what they don't need. The kid with a low sense of uniqueness will continue to do things to bedevil people, because people will then make special recognition of that child and say, good, you're special because you're the worst one here. You know? And that makes that child special. The kid with a low sense of power is highly manipulative, and in the manipulativeness gets at least some feeling that they're able to control something about their world. The kid with a low sense of models will do things over and over in an obsessive way by rote, even if it's the wrong thing, because that helps the child feel a structure to what it is they're doing that helps them make sense out of what they're doing. So all of children's misbehavior is a function of trying to reclaim the feeling that they don't feel very much. And in attempting to reclaim that feeling, usually what happens is their behavior gets messed up. And that messes everybody else up. You and me and their teachers and everybody else. And that's what self-esteem in children is all about. Thank you very much.